Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. We are restarting our journey into Carl Jung. And today is another introductory meetup. What I'm trying to do in this meetup is to connect up with the work that we have done in the past. And specifically, we started our Jung meetups by asking a whole bunch of Jungian experts, what are the key ideas of Carl Jung? And everybody, there was a consensus. There are 7 ideas. Of course, many people had many ideas. And there were 7 ideas that kept coming back. And we did entire meetups on each of those ideas with a panel of Jungian analysts and scholars commenting on them. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through those ideas. I'm going to list all the ideas, talk a little bit about them briefly, and I'm going to use this screen to keep track of the ideas here. So I'm going to make it easy. I'm going to put a circle here. Let me see. It's not a particularly good circle. Okay, that's not bad. All right. So I'm going to put some ideas down. Okay, we're going to be talking about 7 ideas. I'm going to put at the top the idea of the self here, individuation. Second idea is that of individuation. Okay. Then right at the bottom here, I'm going to put shadow and anima or animus. Okay. And we have 3 more ideas left, that of archetypes, cognitive functions, and mandalas. So let me put archetypes here. Types. And here I'm going to put cognitive functions. And here I'll put mandalas. So this is a mandala. Let's put these points here. All right. So let's get started. What we're going to do is I'm going to do a very brief talk about each of the ideas. Maybe I will do some votes on which of the ideas people want to discuss further, and we will go into them. But first, let's look at these ideas of the 7 ideas of Jung. Now, Jung is a particularly hard thinker to get at. Even people who have spent their entire lifetime say that, Jung is very hard to read. And I think Jung himself would agree to that. And this way of using 7 ideas is a way of seeing the breadth of his thought and some connections between the thoughts, okay? Again, I'm not a Jungian expert, but we've spent considerable time doing Jungian meetups. We've done 50 plus meetups. I think the deepest idea of Carl Jung is that of the self, which is the whole of yourself. So this is as compared to, so I'm going to put other ideas on the side here, as compared to ego, for example, which is about what you think you are. or persona, where you're saying, okay, what do I want to present to others as I am? In this process, there are other two big ideas, and that is that of unconscious and conscious. And Jung actually says yes to both the unconscious and the conscious. What he does is that he says the self is the whole, that it includes the unconscious and the conscious. If you're focused only on the conscious, then you're focused on the ego, whatever it is that you know about yourself. The unconscious is much, 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 much larger, and it has a lot of connections from which you can draw. So this interplay between conscious and the unconscious is a very key aspect of Carl Jung's thinking. The process of individuation is the process of moving towards the self, the whole, making the unconscious things conscious on a continual basis, accepting things. This idea of unconscious and conscious is very closely connected to the idea of shadow. Because what Jung says is that whatever it is that you focus on the conscious, the thing which is opposite of that, you tend to ignore. It remains in darkness. He think of conscious as a searchlight. You can point a search, and it is pointed in a particular direction. And if you're pointing it one way, what is behind you is the shadow. And the shadow is a very large idea in Jung. It's closely connected with the unconscious. The next idea I want to take is anima, animus. That's a very deep idea. I don't understand it too well. It is about completion. You know, we are beings of certain kind. We have certain, okay, you know what? The best way to think about it is to start with cognitive functions. So this, cognitive functions here is a very core idea of Jung. He says that there are two kinds of functions. There is perceiving functions, perceive, and judging functions. And in perceiving, there is sensing, and there is intuition. And on the judging side, you got thinking, and you've got emotions, feelings. Okay, let me see if I can draw it here. Let me just put it, let me see, where am I going to put it? Just a second, there's a problem with the screen. So I'll just put it here, feeling, okay? So those are the two. So those are the four functions. And there is introverted and extroverted orientation. So there is extroverted thinking and introverted thinking. There is extroverted sensation and introverted sensation, which is memory. So this is one large idea. And he holds that there are some, we focus on certain functions. So some function is our hero function or our primary function. And a function which is opposite of that will be in the, anima function, which will complete you. So for example, if you're extroverted intuition, then introverted sensation would be the opposite of that. And if you had that would complete you, and you have a certain kind of, when you deal with another person who has that opposite function, you have this feeling of being completed. And so this one, you can see that this is related to this one. The cognitive functions and anima and animus are related. The shadow is also related. You can think of it in terms of cognitive functions like that. Another big area here is that of archetypes. Archetypes, the way Jung thinks about them is that Jung studied all cultures, different cultures, and tried to look for patterns that were common to all the cultures. And that's what he tries to capture in archetypes. So there is a mother archetype, a child archetype, a father archetype, a jester archetype, hero archetype. So there are all kinds of archetypes. So that is about archetypes. What is this mandala? Mandala is Jung's idea, which is really shown in his book called The Red Book, that our visual cortex is very powerful and we are able to pull together. For example, here we are using our visual cortex. We are able to pull together very deep relationships, complex relationships together using those, using the cortex. So he has these amazing drawings which try to capture the interplay between various psychic phenomena using these, drawings. So that's a very quick introduction to these 7 concepts. Now, what I would like to do is I would like to now ask you, you can vote for up to 3 concepts that you are interested in discussing, and then we will dive deep into the concepts, in the order in which people vote for them. So if Evanik, if you could keep track of, so let me just put it, this is 1, you can just put numbers there. You can use a different color here, and then you can just type in 3 numbers separated by commas. So this is 1, 1 is self, 2 is individuation, 3 is cognitive functions, 4 is archetypes, 5 is mandala, 6 is animus, and 7 is shadow. So you can go ahead and type in as many, you can type up to 3 numbers, and Evanik is going to keep track of all. So we got 1, okay, 2, 7, 1, very good. Pali, very good. All right. So keep voting, folks. Let people know what you would like to hear about, what you would like to discuss, so we can dive deep into that. So self, individuation, cognitive function, number 3, archetypes, number 4, mandala, number 5, animus, number 6, and shadow, number 7. And very good, very good. So Evanik, I'm going to give a couple of minutes. If you could start tallying, and whenever you have the tally ready, you can just unmute yourself and give me, from the top. We can just go like 1, 2, 3, which one's got how many votes, and I will write them down here, and then we will choose some of them and we'll start discussing from the top. Or if there is a pattern, I will arrange them and we will start discussing them. All right. So folks, you've last few seconds to vote. And then we're going to go into each of these concepts. We'll not be able to discuss all 7, so we'll just go for ones that we can discuss, and we'll discuss them for a few minutes and then go to the next one. So Evanik, whenever you're ready, you can just go ahead and unmute. Go ahead, Evanik.
Okay. So 1 got 4 votes.
Okay.
2 got.
Just hold on a second. Let me use a different color.
Okay.
Okay. 4 votes. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Two.
2 got 2 votes.
2 votes. Okay.
3 didn't get any.
Okay.
4 got 4 votes.
Okay.
5 got 1 vote.
Mm-hmm.
6 got 3 votes.
Mm-hmm.
And 7 got 8 votes.
Wow. Wow. Everybody wants to talk about the most difficult thing. Oh, all right. All right. Okay. Now, so 8 people have voted for the shadow. All right. So we have to start with that. And then we'll go to self and archetypes. And we'll go from there. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second here. Okay. All right. So let's start with the shadow. All right. Is anybody familiar with the concept of shadow? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to discuss, if you'd like to just talk about what you understand by shadow, because this is going to be a back and forth conversation. Would love to hear your thoughts. Or what is it? You can either say what you know about the shadow, or why is it that so many people why do you want to discuss the shadow of all things? Let us shed some light on that. Go ahead, type an exclamation mark if you'd like to answer the question. Why do you want to discuss shadow? Or what do you know about shadow? What do you find interesting about it? We'll start with Connie. Give me just a second. Let me make sure you can unmute. Go ahead, Connie.
Yeah, I did actually put this as one of my preferences. I know very little about it, but it seems to come up in conversation a lot. And I think it's a side that we have each of us in ourselves. And it's a side that we often don't want to look at. It's often called our dark side. And often what we see in someone else that we don't like, it may trigger us. It's part of ourself that we are not accepting. That's kind of the depth of all I know.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Very, 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 very good description. Anybody else wants to talk about either why they want to look at shadow? Yes, Mike. Why do you want to look at the shadow? Or what do you know about the shadow? Could you please unmute?
It's the dark side, as was stated. That everybody has a dark side, an evil spirit, and a good spirit inside of them. Like like two devils sitting on your shoulders, telling you what to do. Now, he didn't talk about it too much in his writings, but the Red Book, which was published posthumously after he died, had a lot of stuff in it. I think that that's one of the things he got from his dialogue with Wolfgang Pauli in the 30s. And I think we've talked about what happened to Wolfgang Pauli and why the two of them got together. Wolfgang Pauli is one of the major.
Let's not go too much into Pauli, but anything else you want to share?
I think that's where he got it from
okay.
Wolfgang Pauli.
Excellent.
It's a projection of the dark side.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Next up is Chris. Okay. Chris is no longer in here. Okay. Anybody else wants to say anything? Okay.
I'll go.
Go ahead.
I don't know much about the shadow, but I think it's interesting. Jordan Peterson did something on it where he was in a class and he compared it like the Lion King, with Mufasa and Scar. And he said that was a perfect metaphor for the shadow. Like Mufasa is the person that we like to present ourselves. And Scar is the person who We really are. And if we ignore that, that's how you become Scar. And he was saying in this lesson that kind of, Mufasa became Scar because he ignored that. He ignores that side of him, so that side takes over, and it killed Mufasa because he ignored it. And it's real, and it's good that we have it, but we have to know that it's there and acknowledge it. So I just thought that was interesting.
Excellent. That's excellent example. Thank you. Next up is Chris, followed by David. Chris, go ahead. Chris, are you back? Okay. Next up is going to be David. David, go ahead. David, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, it's a question of who says it's the shadow? Who says it's the dark side? Which part of you is abusively labeling another part of you negatively? So if we take a very well-known example of a moral dilemma that Jean-Paul Sartre was faced with or brought up, if there's a war, do I go and help my nation as a soldier, or do I stay and look after my ailing mother who needs me? So that both sides, there's two moral dilemmas. Each side of you, as you're pulled apart in conflict, will label the other as bad, evil, shadow, dark side. So the term shadow is an abuse term used by one part of you against the other. So
Okay.
it's...
Are you saying that that is the view of Carl Jung, or that is your view?
My view.
Okay, understand. Thank you. All right. Next up, let's see. Let me say something. Let me see what. Okay. Right. Okay. Next up is Marco. Marco, go ahead.
I guess it's the negative, like the negative emotions, like anger and sadness, yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Mike, you wanted to add something.
I think Chris wanted to go. I think she's
Chris?
trying.
Chris, are you ready?
Try. Oh, you're on mute, Chris.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, Chris.
Oh,
Go
good, good, good. Yes, the shadow. I love the shadow, but it drives me without, unbeknownst to myself, until something percolates through and then I could grab it. And also the affiliation from the shadow to the collective unconscious. That's the piece. I think it's and in both. I think it's all of it. It's contrast. It's unbeknownst to us until there's an inkling, until it could percolate up. And there always seems to be a pearl in the shadow. It's like the synergetic effect of the opposite of tensions that Jung talks about, and it gets synergized. And then once it's integrated, the shadow material is integrated, we're closer to like that non-dualistic mindset. So we don't even necessarily have a negative or positive emotion. Things are just as they are with a magnitude of depth to them.
Wonderful. Chris, very, very, very nicely put. Thank you. Thank you. Mike, did you want to add anything to what shadow is?
Yeah, I basically usually agree with David about everything, and there are several characters which have very picturesque German names that he talks about the shadow, and his job, your job is to integrate these different things. It's kind of like Shakespeare's "Nothing is good or bad, save thinking make it so." And the names that they have for the shadow, which are not necessarily bad, or maybe some of them are bad, but even the bad ones have good attributes. The darkness, embrace it, and he tells you to embrace the darkness. He has the devil, which he doesn't exactly condemn. He said it's instinctual drives and temptation, some of which are good and some of which are bad. Another character is the red one, the Rote which is a fiery, destructive figure, uh, which has both primal aggression and creative potential. Embrace that one too. And then he has another one which has the unique name Siegfried, which maybe is reminiscent of his arch rival for head of the psychology organization. And your job is integration, not elimination.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Great observations. All right. So let me make some observations, and then we can have a discussion. If anything comes up based on anything that I have said or others have said, we can continue. So Jung is always focused on the whole. So the idea of the self that he has is that of the whole of you. And what he's saying with the shadow is something quite profound. You know, my favorite statement of his about it is, in the filth it will be found. It's not actually his. It's a much older saying. But what happens is that we tend to evade things that contradict with our idea of ourselves, though they are parts of reality and parts of you. We tend to do that. It is kind of comes part and parcel with focusing on something. When you're focusing on something, whatever is behind you, you can't see. And you get good at focusing on certain things. You have this positive loop going on. You're being more effective at doing that, and you keep doing that, and you try to ignore things at your back. The other idea, I mean, this ties up with so many of his ideas. One of the ideas is that of the known and the unknown, or order and chaos. You know, we feel comfortable with order, but we're surrounded by chaos. And a lot of the opportunity lies in going into the chaos, though it is uncomfortable and you can't see very well in there, and trying to order it. So this is very much about the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell talks about. Joseph Campbell is based, his work is based on Jung. This is that of the hero, who starts out in the city, which is the known, which is conscious, and you go out into the forest, you slay the dragon, and bring the gold back into the city to make the city better. So shadow is an integral part. Jung holds that this is an integral part of who you are, and a lot of the individuation is to integrate the shadow. Stop evading it, say yes to it, and integrate it with yourself. And there is all kinds of phenomena of your reactions to other people based on your shadow. Many such phenomena that Jung talks about. All right. Does anybody else want to comment anything on the shadow? It's an immensely deep and dark topic. And it is all about, that there is pearl in it, It is the dark side. It is all about you not accepting something about you, you not wanting to look at it. Adam, go ahead.
Well, I do find it ironic, but also interesting that there's not as much chatter in here, but yet we all, I mean, almost in a unanimous form, we all chose this as the topic. As you know, there was no other one, like, you know, we had 8 or 7 different variants in there to choose from, and this was overwhelmingly the unanimous topic. It is difficult. It is hard. I think some people, young, you know, sat there and said, yes, basically, we're not angels, but some of us are under the illusion, and you know, you may go through certain points of life, and I don't know whether that's just the format of this game, whatever you want to call this world, that at some point that hero's journey may begin for you. And when it does, it puts a mirror right in your face and asks you to, okay, and whether it's, you know, certain things align that just sort of, okay, whoa, there's that side of me that I've been talking about. There's the young side. And I loved when he talks, and I often, Shrikant, it seems like you want to include more young in. So I did grab a nice little quote because he talked about the difficulties in meeting himself, because it's not easy. And I got 2 quotes for you from Jung. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable, and therefore it's not very popular. He knew, you know, that even, you know, okay, we'd like to stay on the light, you know, we'd like to stay. How many of us don't want to wake up and see sunshine and rainbows outside? How many of us want to sit there in the darkness and the cold of the winter? You know, how many of us want summer all year round, every day? But even this universe, you know, it's a mirror in itself. It has a season for each part. And it's just fascinating. He said the meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. But one must learn to know oneself in order to know who one is. And I just love it. It's just this dogged pursuit of who I am on this planet. And it's, you know, it takes me back to Socrates, the unexamined life. It just seems like Jung was all in. I'm going to know everything about me. It's a wonderful pursuit, and I don't know. It just I think it's just, again, I love that everybody here wanted, you know, whether conscious, you know, we all made the conscious decision, but that we all wanted this, and because we all know deep down, okay, I'm good, but how good am I? I'm bad, but how bad am I? And we'd probably want to know the answer to the first one. We may not want the answer to the second one.
Adam, that was great, and thank you for bringing in Jung, because you know, and I encourage everybody to do that throughout this series, because you know, his ability to capture things is incredible. I want to make one more connection here, you know, because we are doing all these meetups on various things. This is really the heart, you know, in the New Testament. This is the heart of the cross. This is what cross is. You know, you're carrying your old man. That means you're carrying all your preconceptions and everything about you. And you're just living that. And it's so comfortable because it's your habits, it's your emotions, it's your thoughts. But real growth consists of refocusing your attention on the truth about yourself, no matter how painful it is. And it does mean transformation, giving up of habits, acting against your emotions, giving up your previous ideas. And all growth comes from that. So that is the quote of, in the filth it would be found. And all of that put together, it's like, so it's not really, what happens is that you get attached to things. And because you're attached to things, you forget about the rest of the world. You're trying to ignore the rest of the world. You're saying, I'm good. I have everything I need. But the world is much larger. You are much larger. That's what Jung is saying. So at one like your first reaction to that, to shadow, when you learn about it, is say, oh, this is a negative thing. But actually, that is the way up. You have to go down in order to come up. That's the whole idea of the shadow. It is the idea of rebirth. It is the idea of rejuvenation. It is the idea of restoration of the self. You have replaced the self, your true self, with something else. Because simply you're attached to it and you're afraid of looking at yourself. So wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Adam. Does anybody else want to say anything about the shadow? By the way, I put our entire 2-hour meetup or 2.5-hour meetup on the shadow, where I had a panel. We had a panel of Jungian psychoanalysts who actually practice this, who had been practicing this for decades, presenting their own idea of shadow, what is involved in that, how it operates in people, and then going back and forth between each other, discussing that. So don't miss that. All right. If there is nothing else, now we have got the next ones are two. We've got the self and archetypes. And the idea of self is closely connected with what we've been discussing so far, because the purpose of focusing on the shadow is to get to the self, is to restore the self. So the self to Jung is a very large, so it's like if you put the circles, this is what your whole self is, and your ego or consciousness is this little thing within it. And what you're trying to do is that you're relentlessly trying to expand your consciousness to include, to say yes to all of you. The other point that Mike brought up, which is also a very important thing, there are all these processes that are operative. You have kind of anger, which is not justified. You have all kinds of bad emotions. You have tendencies like that. You have jealousy. You have all of those things. And you have to be, and if you turn yourself away from it, it doesn't make it go away. Jordan Peterson puts it, it's like a dragon under the carpet. The more you ignore it, the bigger it gets. And it's only by looking at it that, he goes away, because he cannot handle the light that comes from within you, looking at it. So the self is the whole of yourself. It is the unconscious and conscious. And unlike some other psychologists who almost idolize the unconscious and kind of minimize the role of the conscious, Jung is all about integration of the conscious and the unconscious, having deep respect for the unconscious and deep respect for the conscious, and relentlessly expanding the conscious to cover the unconscious, to explore the unconscious and make it your own. You can look at this as a dance within a person, but you can see that, the example of the hero's journey, or, going out from a city which is known into the unknown of the forest, slaying the dragon and bringing the gold back. That process is the process of expansion of consciousness, of including more of reality. It is this continuous dance between the order and chaos. The growth is taking place on the border. You need to operate with one foot in the order and one foot in chaos. You can't have both your feet in order, because then you stop growing. And when you stop growing, you start decaying and dying. If you put both your feet in chaos, you can't find a footing. So it is that dance, that openness. So there are all kinds of things. One of my favorite works by Carl Jung is Seven Sermons to the Dead. You can search it on internet. It's a short 40-minute, just incredible piece, which is part of the Red Book, which talks about this god of Abraxas, this terrible god, which is going between the finite and the infinite, between the order and the chaos. And that is the human position, and that's the human ideal of doing that continually in order to expand, because there is no limit to what you are and what the world is. So it's a very profoundly grand, there is a grandeur to his view of what an individual is. And he's drawing on many, many, many old traditions. So that's what he says about self. So please go ahead and talk about what interests you about self, any comments you have. You're welcome to ask questions. I don't know if I will be able to answer any of them, but you're welcome to put questions on the table. Maybe somebody can answer them. But any thoughts you have, and if anybody has any good quotes from Jung, Adam, or anybody else, please pull them up. That will be it's a great way of seeding this re-entry, returning to Jung. Evanique, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking of I like the integration part of it. I think, integrating the order and chaos, the conscious and the unconscious. I think it kind of ties into the shadow, because it's integrating the shadow into your consciousness. That way, like you said, you're aware of it. And I like what you said about having one foot in order and one foot in chaos, because when you have one foot in chaos, it allows you to grow. And if you had both feet in order, you don't grow. And the chaos is sometimes the adversities that we face. And, that makes you confront the shadow, the thing that everybody wanted to talk about. I like what Adam said, but yet, no one wants to talk about it. It's kind of like one of those things. But I think it allows you, when you face adversity, when you face chaos, you have to face that shadow part of yourself, because it's going to come up. Those emotions are going to come up. Those thoughts are going to come up, and they're in the back of your mind. And the cool thing about integration is that you can use that to move forward, and you have to, or otherwise you're not really growing. So I do like the integration aspect of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanique. Anybody else? I've just put in the chat our discussion between among the panelists of Jungian analysts on the self. All right. Anybody else wants to say anything about this? Chris, go ahead.
On the self, the integration definitely of the persona. And I view this as shifting the linear ego to the observing ego, so that the authentic self could be revealed.
Wonderful. Thank you. Very well put. Let me elaborate on it. And then if you would like to add more things, please do. So there are two concepts here that Chris brought up, that of persona and authentic self. We'll also talk about ego. So what happens is, really, self is about the authentic self. Who are you? and really looking at it and really going by that. That's what self is all about. The persona, what happens is that we have two kinds of problems. One is that we want to, I mean, there are many kinds of problems, but these are two main things. One is that you want to appear to be something to the other person. And so you're wearing a mask. It's not you, you're wearing a mask. And if you do that, up to a point, you identify yourself with your persona and not who you are. And suddenly you're saying, because no, I'm that, you're saying no to everything else that is not that. So that's a very profound kind of a problem that people have. The second kind of problem is that of ego, that you internally think that you are a particular kind of a person. And that you're so much invested in that you push away from your mind, from your consciousness, any evidence to the contrary. So you end up disowning parts of yourself. And these parts of yourself are parts of you. And what Jung is saying is that you are an integrated whole. All your parts interact with one another, whether you like them or not, whether you're aware of them or not. By being willfully blind to parts which do not conform to your self-image, you're doing yourself a great disservice. Actually, your strengths or your ego is hampered. It becomes what shall I say? A very superficial version of, even if you are on the right track of saying, this is my most important thing. And let's say that you are right. Those other faculties, those other abilities that you have actually support that main ability. And it becomes far more richer, far more nuanced, far more capable of handling with the world and other people. Here I want to say talk about the connection between this idea of self and interaction between people. As you move towards your authentic self, your ability to, before I go into that, I'll make a point. I won't forget it. I'll put it down on paper. I've got this magic device of pen and paper. It just keeps my thoughts there. So I'll go with Evanik, followed by Chris, and then I will continue. Evanik.
Yeah, when you were talking about earlier, it had me think of the Enneagram that I have been studying. And the thing is, it's like it gives you, it talks about how yourself was formed in childhood, like with childhood experiences and things of that nature. You fit into these 9 numbers, which you figure out on your own. It's like, a lot of people say don't do a test for it. You just kind of like listen in. And the best way I could describe it is I myself am the observer, which is a number 5. And so I observe everything, but my strength, or I like to say, my ego is 8, which is it's not the achiever. I think it's the aggressive one. So in security, I go to being a little aggressive. And then I guess in my shadow, I'm trying to relate it to Jung, but in my shadow or in stress, as the Enneagram would say, I would go to the 7. And the 7 is the one that wants everything at once. Like it kind of wants it and it wants it now. It's kind of the daredevil, but it reminds me of this because I think we were talking about the ego and the mask. So the mask is what we wear when we want to hide something, or we want to present a certain part of ourselves to the world while hiding back others. And, the ego is like what happens, I think, when that doesn't go well, and then we go to the ego and stress. But then I think, the actual number who you are, that's the integration of both the shadow or the shadow and the ego, right? It's all that integration that comes in. And it's not the thing I like about it is like, what Carl Jung does is that it's not all bad. It's not all good. And there it's just how if you know it, then you can control it, then you can use it to move forward and achieve your goals and achieve what you want. So that was my thought as you were talking about the ego.
Excellent. So I just want to elaborate a little bit on that. I'm not that much familiar with Enneagrams, a little bit familiar, but it's a system of trying to say, okay, what are you actually focused on more? Jung has his own system of that, which is the cognitive functions, the extent to which you're focused on thinking, extent to which you're focused on moving physically in the world, extent to which you're focused on intuition. And what you're trying to do is that you're trying to use those to figure out what is it that you're doing. It's a way of firstly discovering yourself by just putting these different measures. You're trying to say, okay, where am I right now? Okay, where am I? What am I habitually doing? So these are different ways of measuring that. At the same time, the big thing that Jung does and all these systems do is that they have, at their best, okay, unfortunately, they tend to be used for a much more kind of lower purpose of saying, okay, you know what, that's what I am, and that's it. Because then you're saying no to everything else that you're not, that you're not really strong on. But Jung's approach is far more inclusive, and his entire process of individuation is about taking these, your child function, your anima function, and integrating those, or your shadow functions, and integrating them with your main functions to become far more holistic person. So thank you, Ebony, for bringing in that angle. So this is such a rich field. So it's wonderful to be kind of, people bring up different things, and we can start talking about, start connecting. And at some point, I'm trying to keep track of everything here, and to figure out, what kinds of fields, what kind of direction that we should take with these meetups. We're going to do them every 2 weeks, and I just want to figure out, where the interests are and where the most exciting exploration lies. Next up is Chris.
Thank you. When you had mentioned how the ego pushes away from parts of self, it just triggered in me to think about, this is Erikson's developmental stages of the formation of the ego to keep us safe. So the ego's foundation is in fear, and it creates defense mechanisms, protective mechanisms, which eventually turn into maladaptive patterns because they no longer work for us when we're beyond our formative years. And then we just get caught in the loop of trying to stay safe with those old paradigms. So as you had mentioned, pushing away from parts of ourself, it went bam. It just like popped for me. The ego is turning away from our higher intelligence. The ego is turning away from our authentic self. And we get further and further away from the authentic self, the higher intelligence. And I remember somewhere where Jung's quote, the quote of Jung I want to mention is, I believe it goes like this. He was asked if he believed in God, and he goes, I don't believe in God. I know God. So the authentic self is indicative of that higher intelligence, whatever to anyone's liking of what they want to refer to it as God. I'm okay with calling it God because that higher intelligence, for me as a human to quantify it and put it in a pigeonhole, it doesn't do it justice. So I don't ascribe to any formal stamp of that because I don't believe any human could truly encompass it. But the thing that I adore about Jung is he was willing to travel to the depths of his being, as scary as it was, only to find out it was all for the greater good of the collective unconscious and to shift the trajectory. Because I really believe the more we work on ourselves and we drill it down and we get closer and closer to the authentic self, energetically, we can change the momentum of the collective unconscious to where humanity can restore or maybe even redeem itself.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. This is just great. You know, we're putting so many interesting things on the table, so many profound things on the table, and we'll keep on building on it. I do have, things I want to follow up on the idea of the motivation by love versus motivation by fear, because that's really foundational to psychology. And it's like two different ways of being, actually. Like either you're kind of trying to protect yourself, whatever you have, you're saying, okay, it's like the world is terrible, I am terrible, I have just this much, let me hold on to it. Okay. And you're kind of in this position of like, crouched position. But when you're opening up, you're saying yes to yourself, and you're saying yes to the world and everybody else. So it's like the open versus closed position, or love versus fear. So I want to build on that as well. So let's go with Katie, followed by Adam. Katie.
Well, it seems like if it protects yourself, I'm trying to figure out why you would want to really integrate that in, because sometimes there are parts of your personality that you don't like. So you might, protect yourself by projecting it, or you might like want to go buy something and you might think, oh, they just sell that over there, I'm just going over there for a little bit, but that's what they do. But that's your brain trying to protect yourself from a negative self-image. So I'm trying to figure out who would be the who would benefit from it, because yourself, if you were to, you'd be kind of living in denial of how you contribute, but it seems like it would protect yourself. So is it for the other person, someone else to look at you, to have like be for, so it's more, you're more self-aware? I'm trying to figure out who they're trying to benefit.
So let me understand the question, Katie. So you're asking that when you're trying to protect yourself, what are you trying to gain from it, or what is, can you rephrase it? I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Yeah, when you're trying to protect yourself, you would be protected. So you would, let's pretend you go shops, you buy something, and you just think, oh, well, I had to. Those people over there sell that. So you project it onto someone else over there. It's not me. For me, it would be like going to get drive-through soda or something. I might project that they just sell that over there when really it's something I want to do. You know what I mean? Because I'm kind of protecting my, but from whose perspective would would you want the integration to happen? Is it from somebody watching, wanting you to take personal responsibility, or is it, why would you have to integrate? Because it's a protection.
I get the question, I think. So it's an excellent question. And Jung's answer would be there are two ways in which you're trying to, you try to protect yourself. One is through ego, and second is through persona. You're trying to protect yourself through ego by pretending to yourself that you are something that you're not. You're trying to kind of shove under the carpet for yourself, regardless of anybody else, that no, I actually want to eat healthy, but it's only because of this thing, that it is. So you're actually, denying what you are. And what happens is that the problem with it is that by denying that, it doesn't go away. Actually, it becomes far more powerful, far more powerful. So what happens is that when you shine light on it, suddenly you realize that it is not that scary. You have means of dealing with it. So that's one thing that you're trying to, protect yourself, your own self-image. You're trying to protect your self-image by not looking at something about yourself. The second thing you're doing is through persona. So that means that you really care about what other people think of you more than what you are, the reality of what you are. And you're willing to fake who you are so that people think that you are a certain way. So you are pretending for their sake. And it's all, both these problems are connected to each other at the hip, because the commonality there is saying that real doesn't matter. There is also fear there. It's like, you're afraid of looking at yourself because you might think that, okay, actually, I'm not so good as I thought. And you're also afraid of other people finding out. So again, it has the motivation for both of them is fear. Saying yes to the self, yes to the unconscious, opening your eyes to the chaos is all about openness or love of existence itself, or yourself itself at a very deep level. Because what it is saying is that no matter what temporary things, setbacks that I will face, and I will face them, overall, the world is good, I am good, and people are good. It's a very positive outlook versus the negative outlook. Thank you, Katie. Great question. Next up is Adam.
Thank you, Shrikant. I just wanted to piggyback and sort of actually piggyback on Chris's and then sort of tap dance between Katie's and Young. Chris, I would love to see whatever literature, and maybe Shrikant, maybe you can touch on it. Where Young talks about, and I do love that quote about Young when they asked him, later on how his views have sort of changed about God. And then but I never saw the point where he talked about, essentially the enlightened being the best version for for humanity. And if you look at history, Jesus, Buddha, I mean, all the way down, to modern people who you might consider enlightened, none of those people are particularly bringing anything poor to the universe, because the path has essentially been right. They've danced with their shadows long enough where they right their wrongs, or at least they're comfortable in them. And they also find that love is the facilitator, the golden facilitator, because they know that those shadows have been created because of a lack of love, for themselves, or because of society, or the household, or whatever, structure they brought up in. But I would love to see and I'd love, Shrikant, if you can touch upon it after I'm done. Just where is that found when he talks profoundly about God and sort of goes, I know that was later on, because his views changed, but I absolutely love that, because Chris said that, and it's like, no enlightened being has ever made this planet worse, I don't think. They've left their impact, and for not just their own generation, not for their own people, but also generations afterwards. And so it is beautiful. But also what Katie's talking about, what if I don't want to sit there and, I have these things and I don't want to touch upon them. And it's like, yeah, Young was, what I talked about, previously when I was on here. Young was very, very understanding that this is a mountain. You are at the bottom. If you start and you have the self-realization that, oh, snap, I am not as good a human being as I am. There's a lot of stuff here. I don't know if I want to put the mirror in it. It's like, yeah, that's very, very true. And so, Katie, that work out there, that is hard, especially I think I would consider it more difficult in today's society because we have so many. Shrikant, we talked about this, I think, in this forum or another forum, where you have so many different things pulling your attention from here to here. And you talked about creating and being the creator as opposed to, being bounced around. And it's like the only way you get to create is by lessening those distractions and being brave enough to go into that fire. But you damn sure don't have to do it alone, Katie, I guess is my point. And if you need people's hands to hold you, you should find the right people. I don't know who those are. You probably know them, or maybe you haven't met them, and that's part of the path. But don't just say, "Oh, I'm going to put this to the side," because as Jung talked about, Shrikant talks about with the dragon essentially analogy, you push that thing under there, it keeps growing, keeps growing, keeps growing, and you're feeding it. You're feeding it. The unexamined life. I go back to Socrates. You don't examine that part of you. You know it's there. You're just going to go the next 30, 40 years without even taking a peek under that carpet. And at least, what does that dragon look like? Oh, maybe, okay. And you say it's not as scary as it is. So I guess my point is just, yes, those people out there, it is hard. It is difficult. It is the nitty gritty work. But what's the opposite? The other side is you just ignore it and allow it to show up in your unconscious. And I think Jung called it, those who deny their unconscious, it turns up in their world, and their interior turns up into their exterior, and they call it fate. And that was his quote. And it's not fate. It's, you haven't sat here and you're just dragging this alongside you, and you haven't looked into it. So my thing is just, if you're going to take the journey, and you should, just make sure you don't have to do it alone.
Excellent point. Thank you, Adam. I want to comment a little bit on this, but I was wondering, Chris, are you aware of where Jung talks about God, towards the end of his life? Because I would be very much interested in that myself. Jung's works are very difficult to, he talks about things in various places. So any comments on where he talks most about God, Chris?
Off the top of my head, I don't. It's just that quote stands out for me. And the reason why I use the word higher intelligence within our being is, as I think it was Adam mentioned, the enlightened beings, it almost sounds as if they aligned with that higher intelligence that's inherent to all our beings, right? They say like an acorn doesn't have to think about becoming an oak tree, right? As long as it doesn't get devoured by a squirrel, right? So if I have a devouring parent, I may never become an oak tree unless I go into the depths of my being to resolve via individuation and some of the other aspects that Jung talks about, to detach with love from the devouring parent so that I could clear the way for my authentic self to come through. Because we have to face the fear of being nothing if we integrate the persona in the ego. If we integrate the persona and we manifest the observing ego, where we're allowed to function, where we're able to function with the executive functioning, drive our car and what have you, but get out of the line of fire of judgment and criticism, then the pilot light of the authentic self will begin to shine through and grow larger and larger and larger. But most, I can speak for myself. It's scary to be like, well, who will I be if I no longer over-identify with what I do? Who will I be if I integrate holding down all what I'm holding down in my shadow? Who will I be? But I needed more of some kind of spiritual piece or mysticism to hold on to brave going into my depths. And I just love Carl Jung so much for the depths, because he traveled into the depths. And when he went into all the scariness of his depths, it's in the Red Book somewhere. Then he emerged, because even all the scariness that he faced was part and parcel related to the ego's perception. And it wasn't necessarily scary or not from the non-dualistic perspective, because the emotion is like, I'm not saying for people to be numb, But when we get to a certain place of peace, the higher hertz, the higher expanded energy, we're no longer bothered by the denser energies of, say, a depression or annoyance or irritability, right? Because if we could hold that higher frequency of joy or peace, it's not to say we don't have compassion. Of course, we have compassion because we're going towards love. But it's as you go more into the expanded hertz of the energy of the molecular structure of the being, we're no longer burdened by the dense, heavier energy. That's the only way I can put it. And the cognitions become non-dualistic. So it's no longer it's no longer either or, it's no longer and both. It's a synergetic effect from the opposite of the tensions. And it's all of it, and yet it's none of it. And I think Carl Jung said that too.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Now, in terms of, I've the place where I have seen Jung really explore this is in the Red Book, in particular, this is early in his life, in particular, the 7 Sermons to the Dead. I mean, it's just incredible. This is my favorite work by Jung, because I think it's the only work of fiction or literature that he has done. And art is very deep because it actually dramatizes these issues very intensely and very powerfully. So that's where I would start. If you want to say, okay, what does Jung have to say about God? That's where I would start. I want to make 3 points. Actually turn out to be very related to each other. One is the concept of authentic relating. What is journey to the self? What is the impact of that on how you relate to other people? That's the first question. The second question is about this motivation by love versus motivation by fear and how it works. And the third one was Chris's observation about, like, as you make this progress towards the self, at the same time, the thing that makes you move towards the self, you're becoming more of whole, your integration with people as such keeps growing dramatically, because you're saying we are all the same at a very foundational level as beings. Our nature is the same. We have different trajectories, we have different upbringings, we have different genetics, we have different learnings, we have different interests, we have different habits, we have different all kinds of things. But the root base is the same. And when you say yes to the base, you're automatically connecting to the others better, because you're saying yes to all of yourself, let's say. You're saying yes to all of them too. So suddenly, instead of interacting on this one narrow channel, you have this entire channel in which you are interacting. No matter, maybe they are like this and you're like this, it doesn't matter. But you're not just going like this at each other. It's like, oh, you're just going past each other, talking past each other. You don't even see each other. So it's and again, the point about love is you're saying yes to yourself, and you're saying yes to the universe itself. You're saying yes to the people as such. And what that ends up being is that there is this synergy that happens, because there are so many ways. Actually, if you look at it, differences amongst us are the greatest opportunities. If you say yes to yourself, and if you say yes to the other person, and the other person also does the same thing, then the differences actually allow you to work together and produce something that you couldn't possibly do by yourself, because you are simply going to work with them where they are strong, and they are going to work with you where you are strong, and you're going to have empathy or kind of appreciation for even places where you're weak and they are strong. So it provides this base, which is incredible. So the self has, focus on the self has profound implications on interactions between people. All right, let's go to the next topic, and that's of archetypes. Okay. I think we're doing pretty well. Evanik, what do you think? How is it going?
I think it's going good.
So, archetypes is very deep. Actually, Evanik, along with Brian and Penny, has been doing a series on Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell's entire approach is Jungian. He's taking that. So I'm going to just ask Evanik. Evanik, what did you learn about? What have you been learning about archetypes? I don't want to put you in the spot, but if you're willing to answer the question, if you want, you can start off. Please go ahead.
Sure. So, what I've been learning from the Power of Myth is that I don't know that much about archetypes, but I can tell you what I've been learning. So, like each culture, each has a myth, and the myth is to explain the 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 growth through life. So, I'm just trying to think. It's the myth is used to explain something. So there was one where, in this African tribe, for instance, where they go through where a young man is actually sacrificed every year, and they treat this person like gold for the entire year, and then the person is willingly going to be sacrificed, and he's happy about it. And it's a symbol of not being afraid of death, kind of like, going through that cycle. What it's teaching us is that, you know, um, death is coming for all of us, but, we can live a life that's full, and then we won't be so afraid of it. That's a paraphrasing, of course. I think one of the other things that they talked about is, it's all about going through the stages of life. I think that is just a quick summation of the Power of Myth. Joseph Campbell goes through this, well, the video series, I should say, and it's all about different phases of life, and how people explain it, how people teach others how to live through it. He says, obviously, even he talks about Christianity and the sacrifice of Jesus, and for people, and he says it in a way that's like, for people who think that, when people are sacrificing other religions, that it's barbaric. He was like, look at what Christianity did. We sacrificed Jesus for our sins. Jesus taught us how to live, and then Jesus had to go to die. We had to sacrifice him. And it's just been an interesting thing where I've noticed that even though it's different stories and different ways of telling stories, it's all about the same thing. It's taking us through different stages of life. And, and these myths are the myths are trying to explain that. So I don't know if that fits archetypes because I'm not that familiar with that part.
That's
but
fine.
That's what we've learned so far.
Thank you. That's great. So Jung thought of archetypes. It's a very core idea for him. According to Jung, archetypes are innate patterns of thought and behavior that strive for realization within an individual's environment. Okay, so what archetypes are? So firstly, us human beings can relate to other human beings. Instead of an abstract thing, a person like a child or a mother archetype is something that we can relate to, because it's like a whole pattern of behavior that you can think of and you can emulate, you can relate to in whatever way. So what Jung is doing with archetypes is to identify these core human patterns and look at how they operate in us. So mother, father, jester, trickster, it just a whole bunch of them. And you can get very elaborate. You can think of them in terms of, mythology. You can go in mythology and say, there are certain kinds of characters. There is the hero, who will take the risk. There is the princess, who is a certain kind of a archetype, which is a certain kind of archetype. And what that does is that it actually allows you to think of different ways of being within you and in the people around you. It gives you a vocabulary to think about that. And it may seem like a very simple thing, but the idea of person is a very deep idea. And that's an idea, or that's a whole, WHOLE, to which it's a very complex whole, to which we can react like that. And it allows us to process things so fast. And that's the power of the stories. Because it's not just about those particular characters. It is about certain patterns in your life. And you see that happening. And that is the power of archetypes. So any thoughts on archetypes? Any comments? Any questions? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. DLJ, followed by Chris. DLJ, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is the bit of Jung I'm least happy with. Well, not exactly the archetypes themselves. So as a heuristic, cultural heuristics, I'm okay with that. It's the idea that he's tied it to the collective unconscious, that's my least favorite bit. Because the unconscious isn't in recognizable patterns. That's kind of the whole point of it, right? It's the conscious where we do that. So I think he took the term from Durkheim. Durkheim came up with the collective consciousness, which he says specifically do not metastasize, so don't make it into a thing. And then Jung kind of went, oh, well, can we reverse that? And then he kind of made it into a thing. So it's kind of, I think it's collective unconscious is, nah, I'm not happy with that. But the general idea of cultural artifacts, I guess, that are used as heuristics to help us to understand where other people are at and maybe where we're at. That makes perfect sense. I think it's a very intuitive idea that he came up with there, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, DLJ. Next up is Chris.
I think it's the concept of archetypes is very fascinating and complex and multifaceted. And it's, to me, how I wrap my mind around it is it's a paradigm that's driven by its own energy force that's a bit compartmentalized, a bit away from, the authentic self for sure. And it drives us unconsciously. And then in the depths of the collective unconscious, if I'm manifesting outwardly the hero archetype, chances are in my shadow is the martyr component, because that would be an opposite. And then looking at the collective unconscious, we could kind of determine the momentum of our culture, of what's coming to the surface, and what maybe needs to be revealed or resurrected out of the shadow, so that we could get a better balance or return to some kind of homeostasis that would resolve in peace on the collective. So I believe, this is just me, but since we're all connected through the collective unconscious and we're all one, sometimes I joke with my friends and say, well, I'm from the same cookie dough as you. I'm just the Christmas tree outline and you're a snowman outline. And that's how, it's kind of simplistic, but it's so complex. It's the only way I can really understand it. But from an energy perspective, as I resolve or as I begin to chip away at the integration or synergetic effect of these paradigms within my own being, I think it moves the collective, even if it's just 1 millimeter, in the healing direction. So all the work that any of us do individually, diving into our depths with good intention, I think is a move in the right direction for the greater good for humanity.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. I put in chat a very interesting video. This is actually the most popular video on our YouTube channel. This is actually a presentation by Richard Owens on John Beebe's theory of combining two ideas that we've put on the table. One is archetypes, and that of cognitive functions. It's really, really interesting. And Richard has done a fantastic job of explaining this model. So I want to spend a little bit of time on that. So this is, the way in which Jung thinks about the cognitive functions is that you have these 8 cognitive functions. And each of us has like one function, which is our hero function. So hero is an archetype. That's the go-to person. That's the person that you're going to depend on, the function that you're going to depend on. And then your second function is that of a good parent, which is like an advisor. Imagine you're driving the car. Hero is driving the car. And the father is the navigator who's showing, who's giving the guidance. The third function is called the child function, the eternal child function. So which is not fully developed like a hero, but is a source of joy. And then there is the fourth function, which is the anima or the animus or the spouse, who kind of completes that. So those are the first 4. And then there are different kind of shadow versions of it. Like there is like the cantankerous parent or critiquing parent function and all of that. But if you're interested in kind of seeing how these functions operate, I would recommend that video. All right, so that's on archetypes. I know we are zooming through all of these. I want to do at least one more, and then we'll take a pause. So now we have a choice of anima or animus. I think we got anima. Animus is the next. Then there is, what have we left? We've left anima, animus, individuation, mandala, and cognitive function. So what I want to do now is that instead of going into one, we've got about half an hour or so. Let us look at, now of these 4, anima, animus, individuation, cognitive function, or mandala. If you would like to say anything about any of them, just go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Would love to hear your thoughts. Anything that you find particularly interesting about Jung. I will start with mandala, for example, because it's really powerful idea of bringing any kind of complex thought that you have to bear in this one thing, which you can take in. through a single glance, and you're trying to capture all the dynamic things that are going on so that you can see it and you can interact with it. So it's a very profound way of thinking. I think it's like visual thinking, and our visual cortex is very powerful. Our ability to see patterns visually is superb. So for something like what the topic, the subject that Jung is dealing with, that of the self, this is a very powerful medium. All right. Does anybody want to say anything about anima, animus, individuation, cognitive functions, or mandalas? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Or you can raise your hand in Zoom. We'll start with DLJ. DLJ, go ahead.
Okay, I'll say a bit, Mandela. Mr. Miller. So I'm up for a presentation at David Miller's group next month, exactly a month from now, and I'm going to be doing my mandala on which is basically a moral compass, which north, south, east, west. You get the idea, right? But my general premise is that humans have become more intelligent because of this ability to create categories from continuum, basically signals from noise, right? So we're looking at patterns and we go, let's put that together, whether it's the Chinese zodiac or it's the Western zodiac or Greek zodiac, whichever where it came from. Hierarchy of angels, all the way through to Myers-Briggs even, or superego, ego, id, right? I mean, all of these are examples of somebody drawing it, putting it down on a diagram and going, let's have a look at the gaps, see what works. The periodic table started like that. The standard model started like that. And our ability to look at these categories or even categorize, I think, is what distinguishes humans from other creatures, right? Our ability to categorize and then say, okay, that bit doesn't fit, or that bit does fit, or look, there's a bit missing there. What do we call that? Let's call that oxygen, right? So that the whole ability to create these mandala. Now, the downside is that, of course, can be creating mandala, and I'm calling it the Mandela effect. You know the Mandela effect? Well, I'm calling this the Mandala effect, whereby you're actually trying to fit the data to the pattern. So that's the mistake we sometimes make. We get a nice shape of something and just go, oh, let's fit all the data in. That's the wrong approach, right? So it's all about gap analysis and what fits and what doesn't, and then reshaping your model if it doesn't work, right? And that's basically the scientific method. Well, one direction is the scientific method. You start from the data to the information to the knowledge to wisdom. That's the scientific method. If you go the other way, wisdom to knowledge to information to data, that's folklore, and the feedback loops, of course, is what makes us more refined and more intelligent. So I think it's a really important idea, but we've got to be careful how we use them.
Thank you, DLJ. And next one is going to be Chris. But Adam, if you would like to kind of talk about anything that you would like to talk about next time, or you would like us to discuss next time, please go ahead and speak up. So we'll go with Chris first, and then we'll go to Adam. Chris, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The anima and animus, what I have is more of a question of to have a better understanding of it, because I see it as a way that kind of removes us from our authentic selves, and then it splits us separate. And like I got a little confused with the anima and animus, is that I thought at one time, like as a woman, we'd have the masculine inside, and as the man would have the feminine inside. And then I started to think like, well, maybe even though I'm female gender, that I have an anima and animus, I see it almost as if the self got split and reduced to these warring parts. And then one's in the forefront and then one's in the background. And I think the work that I have to do within my own depths to resolve that through the synergetic effect. That's kind of what I'm toying with now in the energy work that I do. And just the comment in individuation, it's really interesting if we look at the devalued parent versus the idled parent, because, I can speak for myself, right? One parent I idled, which made me IDLE, idled, instead of by IDOL, a parent, made me IDLE because I never was able to individuate. So later on, I had to individuate. And individuating from an IDOL parent is excruciating and painful, more so than individuating from the devalued parent. It was almost easier to find positives in the devalued parent than it was to find negatives in the idolized parent, because the idolized parent bond was based on fear. It was a traumatic bonding. And that's why that parent became the idol. So I became an extension of the idol. So the individuation process is very fascinating. But as I drill it down, I almost seem like within the anima and animus within myself, and one's in the foreground and one's in the background. So I'm toying with that. So I would like to hear any feedback or any, references. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Unfortunately, this is, I don't know enough about this. This is a very deep topic because it actually, it's like it speaks to, it's really how you respond to things, respond to other people or parts of yourself. And it's a very, very delicate and very, very beautiful topic. And so I would recommend that, these folks who have been working on it for a very long time, they did a fantastic job of talking about it because they could come at it from multiple angles. So that's what I would recommend. Unfortunately, I don't have too much to say on that. But thank you. You kind of put things on the table, which is really, really good for people, so people can get a sense of what this is about. Jung is so deep that you have to kind of keep doing that many, 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 many times to kind of slowly start exploring. So thank you so much. Let's see here. Adam, what topics would you like to see covered?
Well, Kimberly said it. If we're going to skip, you put out 8 there.
Yeah.
The assumption tonight, or I guess maybe my assumption was that if we do them, we picked 3 that we were going to sit there on the next week. We're going to sit there and pick up the ones that and then you picking a 4th that we're going to pick the ones that were left out. Is that true?
We could do that.
Yeah.
But what I try to do with these meetups is to see what is the maximum value I can deliver.
Understandable.
For the meetup. So I don't know that we will do that. I'm not going to lose track of them. Yeah. Okay. So the topics that if you go to the Jung meetups, our Jung playlist, and if you start looking from the oldest one, you will see like the full meetups on each of these. So what I'm thinking of doing in terms of direction is that, we had some really, really amazing Jungian folks who came and spoke here, and on various aspects, we had this, let me just give you like a quick, there is a guy called Michael Pierce who did a bunch of meetups with us. He was very, very good on cognitive functions, very deep thinker. There is a really amazing guy called John Beebe, who did presentations. He himself came like 3 times and talked about his theory about the 8 functions, archetypes, John Beebe on archetypes and Carl Jung. I have a whole meetup on that. We had looking at how does it, let me see here. We had something on anxiety by David Rotman. We had, this was amazing, Voice of the Psyche. How do you listen to your psyche? There's Michael Conforti who came and talked about that. There was a meetup on dream interpretation. We had a meetup on the Red Book. We had a meetup on Marie-Louise von Franz, who is one of the greatest of Jung students. We had, so it just went on and on. You know, we have like a number of meetups that we did. One of my favorite ones was the one on fairy tales by Muriel McMahon. I really love that because she's really good. So she can take a fairy tale and say, okay, what is actually going on in these fairy tales? So there is this potential of exploring this topic in multiple ways. So I'm going to try to figure out what would work the best. So I want a little bit of flexibility to try to do that. Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, I think no, certainly. I mean, we're packing everything in here. We're going about 2 hours of it. Take time, meditate on it. And I'm sure the answer will come. I would love to hear the fairy tales. That is fantastic. I heard Ebonique earlier. I did want to hear more about the Mufasa scar. I absolutely love that. I love when you can take something, a concept, and you might look at it as a kid, but then all of a sudden somebody looks deeper and deeper, and conceptualizing and bringing that home. Chris, I thought brought that home with the anima and the animus, her own personal experiences. I'd love to hear. It seems like tonight we dug a lot into the shadow as the number one thing. It seems like a lot of people are on that path. I'd actually even like to hear your. You don't have to dive deep into your own shadows, but what Jung has sat here and brought. The introduction and how versed you are and how much time you've put into Jung philosophies.
Sure.
What's it had impact on your life in terms of your personal growth? Because it seems like at the very least, you're at least perhaps, the most experienced and Jung out of all of us. What has it meant on your personal journey? I'd like to hear that part.
Sure. So I'd say a couple of things. Firstly, Jung is very unusual amongst the psychologists because he is tapping into something which is much, 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 much older than most 19th and 20th century, 21st century psychologists. What he's doing is that he's actually looking at these patterns, that you can see in his work in archetypes. In some ways, at a very deep level, he is making explicit some of the things that were implicit in much older systems, like the Tao, like the Gita, or like the Bible. When I went through these meetups on Jung, and my style of learning is that I just dive into different things and I spend time trying to understand it. And I don't necessarily have a very good context when I'm doing that. Because my focus isn't always on learning. And, Jung, and what I try to do is that I try to learn from other people. That's why I try to do a lot of kind of conversational meetups, as well as a lot of presentations. So I'm happy to have people who know things present at length and then have detailed conversation. And I also love meetups like this, where we are going in back and forth and sharing what each of us knows, because this is not a theoretical discipline. This is about us, each of us, how we can be better human beings. That's what it is about. And only to that extent to which you complete the loop of saying, okay, I learned something about it, but so what? How are you going to be better off as a result of that? And whatever we are exploring is so deep that each person brings their own viewpoint. The biggest thing that I got from Jung is mostly in the Red Book. I have learned a lot from the cognitive functions. That terminology I find very useful. I don't like the way in which it has been implemented in various things in MBTI, etc., because they look at human beings in the modern sense. I'll say, okay, look, you are this, you are an ENTP, so you do this, and that's it, and that's all you can be. And Jung never thought that. Jung always thought that all of us have all these functions, and over time you have to develop these functions. Yes, you're stronger at some things than others. You have to identify that as well, because you want to know what your strengths are, but you also want to know what your weaknesses are. And you want to be able to see that in other people. So one thing that I've learned from Jung is in the area of cognitive functions. And I've learned two things from that. One is to measure myself a little bit better, because you can say, okay, what can you do? I can do this. And then you actually see other people doing that. Secondly, it also helps you deal with people. Before I learned this, many times people would be like, wait, why is this person doing that? And you would get unnecessarily angry with them. It's because their style is so different than yours. But once you have the vocabulary, it helps you to kind of say, oh, he's going at it at that level, and she's going at it at that level. And that's why they're completely crossing paths and you can't see that. So that's something that I found very useful. Actually, when, before COVID, I was doing, I have to tell you this because this is a topic we did not go into. So I'll touch upon it briefly here. I did meetups in New York. I'm in New York, and I had one of the largest meetup groups in New York, focused on psychology and philosophy. Every Saturday, we would get between 60 to 80 people showing up to discuss whatever it is that I was studying at that time, or we were studying at that time. And once I got interested in Jungian functions, I did a whole series of meetups, I think maybe 20 of them, where I would get all these people, and they were all enthusiasts about the Jungian functions. And we would divide into like 4 groups, and then discuss like, okay, let's say the dominant function the same. So everybody with the same dominant function together talking. And then, okay, and we do 4 experiments, 4 different ways of dividing. And you actually learn a lot about people, and about the richness of people and variety of people. So that's one thing that I've learned a lot from the cognitive functions, that remains as a good kind of toolkit, fully focused. I'm very fully focused on the wholeness of the self. But you need to have a pattern. You have to be able to say, okay, what are you doing? So cognitive functions is one large area. The second large area for me is, he has made explicit something which only now I know a little bit about. At that time, I did not know at all much about religion. And we went into about 1.5 years ago. I said, okay, we have not really studied religion in this. So we studied 3 great religions, one from China, one from India, one from the West. So I chose Tao Te Ching from China, Bhagavad Gita from India, and the Gospel of John. And actually, Jung derives a lot of inspiration from this. And he has his own take. I personally think that these works are much, much higher than Jung. They are far, far deeper. But Jung makes some of those things more accessible to the modern mind in a different terminology. And that's why my favorite work of his is the 7 Sermons to the Dead, where he's more explicitly talking about how he thinks about the religion, and what religion actually is, because religion is really about these very deep issues. Who are you? And who do you think you are? And are you attached to things where you're forgetting who you are? And what would it involve? So there is a lot of synergy between the religious works and Jung. So those are the big things. So for me, like Jung and religion is something that I would like to explore further. I want to see what he has done, and then Jung in cognitive functions. So Adam, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much. That was that you went in. I liked it. I will say one more thing, Chris. You oh, excuse me. I'm sick. I'm under the weather. That's why I'm not on the camera tonight. I will say Alan Watts, who I don't know how much you guys, if there's one other person I study other than Jung in terms of philosophy, Alan Watts. If any of you guys ever want somebody who breaks it down like Jung, very accessible. Watts, took the East and brought it to the West. He is phenomenal. He's funny. He's smooth. He has an 8-minute reading. We got a lot of different posts and there's, but he has an 8-minute reading. Very much what Chris was talking about. If I work on myself and I get this and I, how much of an impact. And he talks about essentially Watts reads this sermon that Carl Jung gave to a bunch of clergymen. And he says, what if this doctor who doesn't work on himself, essentially, he starts working on himself, then he's able to see his patients at the depth that they're at. And so only by, going inward can he sit there. You talked about you used your analogies. If I had my camera on, you used the one finger, essentially with that, the fingers going in and it's one, frequency sitting there and you're only on that wavelength. Whereas if you've been on every one of those wavelengths and you're operating on multitudes, you can meet a variety of different people and your world expands. And so I think, Chris, when you talk about, if I do the inner work, even just doing or even thinking about it's almost analogous to what's above your head. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. You do that work, the next day it's going to be a good day. It's going to be, you continue to work on that. You might see something that you wouldn't have saw otherwise. I suggest you guys, if you get a chance, like I said, 8 minutes, Alan Watts is phenomenal. It might open you up to his world as well. It's just, it's worth it. But yeah, I don't know.
Adam,
I get fascinated. Yeah.
Adam, could you put that in the chat? So
I did. I'll put it again. I'll paste it again.
Because now you've spoken about it, so people can click on it very easily and check it out.
But yeah. Thank you so much, Shrikant. I think it's fascinating. I love the insight into it. I like when you bring that energy, the curiosity, the passion. It only stirs my fire. And once we're done here, I go to listen and read different things. And it's those little things, working on ourselves, completing that circle that you talk about.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adam. Really appreciate it. Folks, this is a good start to the Jung meetups. And I've deliberately wanted to start it in a conversational way because really just going back and forth with people in an open way. See, I think we have a very unusual forum, okay, where people come, even people who are very new, and they will come and we have this conversation, very deep conversations. And it really doesn't, it's like everybody is open to listening to what other people have to say. And it's just, it's the idea of learning together. And so I'm just delighted that we can be doing this. And thank you very much, Evanique, for being the kind of co-host for these the Jung series. And I'm going to reach out to some of my Jungian friends and see if they want to do something. David did things on France that were amazing. And we had Aiden do a whole bunch of meetups on a variety of topics. Muriel really enjoyed, coming and talking about fairy tales here. All of them are just incredible people, and they like the forum as well. So it would be wonderful to have, their insights, because these people are, they've spent their life working on Jung as a primary thing that they do. So they add so much to it. But at the same time, I like this kind of switching back and forth between having kind of experts talk about it and then just all of us discussing it, because the idea of the living ideas is that we don't want just to have ideas in a book. We want to actually live them. And they have to be living ideas also in the sense that, the ideas are not fixed. They have to keep on growing, keep on transforming themselves, just like life, so it just keeps on growing like that. So I'm just grateful to everybody to be here, who's here and who contributes to that journey for all of us. Thank you, folks. Good night.